Hey everybody, me Joe from Balsa USA. Welcome to the last episode of the Balsa USA Beginner Build Series. In this episode, I'm going to cover how to install your servo tray, and I'm going to give out some good tips and tricks on how to hinge your control surfaces. There's a lot of stuff that I'm going to leave out, like engine mounting and running all your lines and whatnot, because there are so many different ways of setting this up that I kind of wanted to leave that up to you guys. Whether or not you wanted to set it up as electric or whether you not want to set it up as a glow, it's really going to be up to you. And I wanted to leave that part of the build up to you so you didn't think you have to set it up exactly like I have it here. My setup's going to have a 46 size glow engine in it for this particular version, and later on I'm going to cover some of the other options like ailerons that have servos for each aileron and the wings. I'm going to cover the electric conversion. I'm going to cover the tail dragger version, etc. So for this particular build, I wanted to leave it up to you as to how you wanted to set it up, so you didn't think it was absolutely necessary to set it up like I did here. So, once again, welcome to the last episode of the Balsa USA Beginner Build Series. Stay tuned, there's going to be a lot more stuff coming soon. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and happy building. Okay, so now we're going to start installing the radio system. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the Balsa USA triple servo tray for this. It comes with all the parts I'm going to need, so I don't have to worry about using any scrap pieces to make my servo tray. And what I've done is I've went ahead and popped out my pieces. And this is going to be my servo orientation. So what I'll have here with my Futaba servos is I'm going to have this type of an orientation inside the model. So what I've done is I've actually taken my tray, I've went ahead and put my tray down inside my model, and I've figured out where the best position to put my tray in is going to be. So that about right there is about where I'm going to want to be for this installation. And what I did was I took this out, made sure I knew about where I was wanting to be, and I'm going to leave in one servo, just honestly to have a place to grab the servo tray when I put it down inside here. I've figured out where I want the servo tray to about set. I want to try to get it as level as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm going to show you why here in a second. Once you've figured out where you're going to want your servo tray, what I've done is I pushed it over to the side, and I've used a pencil to mark inside here where I'm going to want that tray. So what I did is I made a mark here. Then what I did was I took my hardwood stock that comes inside my servo tray, and I've laid it down inside here. So what I did is I took a piece, I cut it off. There's a little ridge here. And I've came over to where my mark is, and I've marked it. Again, this doesn't have to be 100% exact, because you're going to test fit this here in a little bit. So now I've made a mark on my piece of hardwood, and then I've cut 4 pieces to that length. As you can see right here, I already have my 4 pieces laid out. So then what I did is I came in here with my 4 pieces and figured out where exactly I want the tray to set. And these are gonna be the 4 corners of my tray. So I laid them all out inside. On both sides you can see I've made marks. I know that's hard to see, but there's another mark right here. I placed all my pieces in, just like this. I'm not using any glue to tack them or anything like that. I'm just laying them on the bottom of the fuselage. And I figured out exactly where, now I can't get that one to stand up. I figured out exactly where I want to put all these pieces. Okay. So, there. So then what I did, to figure out if that's the right spot, I've taken my tray and I laid my tray down inside, just laying on top of my blocks. So now you can see I've got all the clearances and everything I'm going to need. It's going to line up pretty good with my holes in the back, as well as where my controls have to go through to the nose wheel, and then the throttle control will be on this side. And that looks pretty good. So now I mark my posts. So these 4 posts that I put down, I mark those on the inside of the fuselage so that when I go to start putting these in, I know right where I want them. And that'll give me the proper placement of my tray. One of the things that you might want to do, it's not going to be critical, but you might want to put this in away from the sides a little bit on both sides. So when we get ready to install the tray later, I'll show you what I mean. There should be a little bit of space on both sides of the servo tray. But what's going to happen is my 4 posts, I'm going to put more hardwood across, and then that's what my servo tray is going to attach to, like this. The other thing I'm going to suggest is that you do the same thing going in this direction. So essentially you're going to build a little box inside your fuselage for your tray to sit on so it stays nice and strong on the inside. Okay? So now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and start getting these blocks glued in place so that we can build our box. So as you can see here, I've got my 4 pieces ready, and I'm actually going to use Balsa USA thick for this part because I want to make sure I get a little bit of time to move these around if need be. So all you simply need to do is place a little bit of thick on each side, and I'm actually going to put a little bit on the bottom, and I'm going to bring this in and line it up with my mark that I just made on the inside of the fuselage. Using the thick gives you the ability to move these around a little bit as you place them so that you get them straight and level. You can use a square for this part, but if you just line them up with your lines, you should be good. If you want to use a square, it's not going to be easy to get one down inside there. So what you could actually do is lay a 1, 2, 3 block inside here and level up to it. That way you get it nice and square. But I think we're going to be good to go because that's exactly to my line. And this isn't really going to be that critical because when the servo tray sits on it, it'll sit there flat. Just like that. So you'll be good to go. So then what you can do is you can go in and glue each one of these down on all 4 sides to give you the start of your servo box. One of the things you're going to want to make sure that you watch for in this process is making sure your servos will clear your box as you put it down inside. So when you do your measurements, lay your box in there, or I should say lay your tray in there on your box, and make sure that your servo connectivity is going to stay out of the way of your box so that you don't bind up your servos on the inside. The servo tray is designed so that you have a little bit of play. Just make sure that you give yourself enough room when you're putting it in there initially to make sure that it's going to fit properly. And again, I'm just going to go through all 4 of these, gluing them into the marks that I made. Making sure they're all lined up nice with the lines that you made. And then what I'm going to actually do, and I'll show this here in a minute, once I get these where I'm happy and make sure everything fits properly, I will actually go back in and put some thin around each one of these so that the glue can wick real good into the wood, and make sure these are nice and solid. Then after that, because this is going to get a lot of use, I will also probably do a fillet along each box with some more thick, just to make sure it's nice and solid. Some of you may choose to use epoxy for this, but to be honest with you, epoxy is not really necessary for this, and that's just added weight that you don't really need. Once you get your 4 pieces in there, you can go ahead and take a little bit of Balsa USA kicker. I'm going to use the method that we showed in an earlier video using the pipette so I don't waste a lot of kicker. And just put some kicker down on each one of these. So that they get nice and solid for me. Once I have those in place, then I can come in and retest fit my servo tray to make sure everything is where I want it. And that's going to be pretty good. It doesn't matter if this doesn't fit 100% on each one of your blocks, because as you can see, I don't have a lot of space, but that's okay because I'm going to put in the other pieces for the box, and the servo tray will actually connect to that. You just want to make sure, like I said, that you give yourself enough room so that your servos won't bind on your box once you have this whole thing put together. That right there is going to be pretty good. So the next step is going to be to take another piece of hardwood and line this up and what I'm actually going to do for mine is I'm actually going to mount this flush with the top of each one of my corners, because I like the measurement that I made earlier. So you can come in here and figure out where you got to be and just make this flush on the top. Instead of mounting this piece on top like that, I'm actually going to mount it flush with the top of the post that I made. Okay, and simply all you need to do is mark it. And again, just like everything else, mark it just a little bit thick. So here's the edge, and I brought the line back just a little bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then I will sand it to that dimension. Once you get that where you want it, then you can take your Zona saw, cut your line, check your fit, and I'm just a little bit long, so then all I need to do is sand to that dimension. And it won't take a lot. Always keep in mind to, when you're sanding these types of things, to take off just a little at a time, so that way you don't go past your mark. One of the tricks I like to show with this type of sanding is you can actually take your blocks and sand them as they set on the flat surface, and then you'll get a little straighter sand. It's kind of hard sometimes to get the end of that perfectly straight, but this does help. So lay it up against a flat surface and sand it down. Until you get it the way you want it. And again, you're only going to be just taking off a little at a time until you get the dimension. We're almost to it. I'm showing you how to do this one, and then I'm going to skip ahead so you don't have to sit here and watch me sand. Just a teeny little bit more and we'll be good to go. So right there is a perfect fit. Now you'll see it's such a good fit, it sets itself up. So you can see here, it's just where I want it. That's why we suggest that you sand to your dimensions, because you can sand a little bit at a time and you don't have to worry about this not fitting. If you sand too much off, then it's just going to fall and you'll have to glue it in place. This is going to be much easier for me to get where I want it because it's tight enough that it's going to hold itself up. And then what we'll do is we'll continue that on. We'll build the rest of the box across and then over here too. And then we'll move on to the next step. So I wanted to show you a quick way to get this dimension while we're working on this. See, I've already got my blocks in for both sides here of my servo tray, and my stock won't fit down inside there so I can get my measurement. So what I did was, you look along here where your side panels are, you can make your mark in this area like that. And then you can cut off to that dimension. That way you can get it fit down inside of your fuselage. And because we want this to mount flush so that our servo tray sets on top, I can make my mark here on where to cut this off at on both sides. And again, give yourself some space so you can sand to that dimension. And then it's easier for me to cut that so that it'll fit. So now that we've got our pieces all fit, you can see here with my triple servo tray, I can place that in place where it's going to go. And I'm not going to have any interference with my servos down inside my tray. It's very important to make sure you do that now as you build, versus try to do it later when everything's already glued and tacked in place. These two pieces here on the end are literally just setting in there. They haven't been glued yet. They're friction fit in there so that I can get everything lined up the way I want. Everything in there looks good. I don't see any spots where it will interfere. My servos will be able to go in there no problem at all, and I can go ahead and get this glued into place. So what I will do here, because I have everything already lined up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Balsa USA Gold Thin CA on these pieces. so that they're glued in place, and I can go ahead and place my triple servo tray in here, and it'll be good to go. Keep in mind this thin CA is going to wick into this wood, so it's going to create a very, very strong joint. And for especially this application where we know the servo tray is not going to get a ton of torque put on it, this is going to be perfect. Once that sets up and dries, those will be tacked in there good and they won't move around, and we're not going to have to worry about the servo tray moving. You want to make sure you let this dry before you place any other parts, because you don't want to accidentally glue it in the wrong spot. So give this a couple minutes to set. With the thin CA, it's not going to take it very long. And sometimes what I'll do, just to make sure, once I've given it some time to wick, I'll just go ahead and place a little bit of kicker on those spots where I have the glue so that it sets off quicker. You don't want to do this right away. You want to give that glue a chance to wick in to the other wood that you're gluing to. But this way I know that this is going to be set up enough that I can place my servo tray in here and not accidentally glue it. Working on this kind of a job where it's tight quarters, you don't want to have to try to be cutting stuff out of here later when you realize it's not lined up correctly. So right there, as you can see, the servo tray is lined up exactly where I'm going to want it. Everything is all set in place. And now all I need to do is glue my servo tray to the top of my box. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. I am going to actually suggest that you glue it in. I've seen guys go in and screw this down so they can get it out later. I don't like that method necessarily, because that's just going to eventually wear out on you. If you glue this down, keep in mind your servos are going to be screwed onto the servo tray, and if you have any servo issues, you can just unscrew the servos. So for me, I like to make sure that it's glued in so it's nice and solid. So now literally all you need to do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come along with some Balsa USA Thick. Again, using thick is going to give me the opportunity to be able to move this around and get it positioned properly before it sets. Now you do want to make sure that kicker's off of there, because it'll kick that thick CA off very quickly. Get everything lined up. Once you get everything lined up and where you like it, then if you want, you can use thick, or I should say you can use some kicker to set it a little quicker. What you're going to want to do, so like right here, I've got a little bit of glue overflow down inside this servo bay. So I'm going to come in here with a piece of paper towel and wipe that out now before it sets. Not a huge big deal, but that will possibly hamper you being able to get your servo down in there, and it's going to be, you'd have to sand it to get it to fit, because these servo trays are cut pretty close. Now that that's set up pretty good, I can test fit my servos just to make sure everything is where I want it to be. And I can't foresee there being any issues. We've got plenty of clearance around everything. And these servos should sit right into place. So there you go. That's installation of the servo tray. And you can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to move on to installing the hinges, and what I'm going to use for this step is going to be the Balsa USA Gold 12-minute epoxy. And I'm going to show you a couple little tricks. First of all, these little medicine cups you get with like cold medicine and stuff are perfect for mixing up epoxy in. Every time we get some of these, I save them just for this reason. So I'm going to go ahead and get this stirred up. This is a 2-part epoxy with the resin and the hardener. Again, this is the 12-minute. You want to give yourself a little bit of extra time to work with this so that you make sure your hinges are in the right spot before they harden up. Every once in a while you'll need to move them around, and you don't want them to get solid in there too fast, because then you've got to try to cut them out, and that's never any fun. I think that's pretty good. So now what I'm going to show you is a little tip. I've got these Dubro hinges here, which are going to be perfect for this. One of the problems a lot of people have is getting epoxy in the hinge and ruining the hinge. So what I have here is I have a little bit of just regular Vaseline and a Q-tip. If you take that Vaseline and run along that hinge line, that will keep the epoxy from getting in your hinge line. You don't want to go overkill with it. Make sure you get both sides and just use the Q-tip to pull off any excess. And that'll keep the epoxy from getting into your hinge. Next thing you want to do is you want to put your epoxy on your hinge. You don't want to go too crazy with this. You do want to make sure you get a nice coating on both sides of your hinge. And you want to make sure that you have some paper towel handy so that you can pull the excess off. Again, you don't want to go too crazy with it because it's just going to make a mess. And then you simply insert the hinge into the point of where it needs to be installed. And what I do is come across it with a little bit of paper towel, just to get any excess off. Just like that. And then you move on to the next one. You just repeat this process for however many hinges you decide to install. I'm going to install 4 on each console surface on my model. And then we'll move on. Again, I'm just placing some Vaseline along my hinge line to keep the epoxy out. And install the hinge. I hope you've enjoyed the Beginner Build series, and I hope that it's helped you get along the way and get over some of the intimidation that people have when they're first getting started in building. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and happy building.